Professor Cruz, welcome to week 12 of World Cultural Geography. Our topic this week is development. Geographers study levels of development, which are the material conditions of people, to understand how development varies across space, the determinants of development, and the economic connections between more developed countries, also known as MDCs, and less developed countries, known as LDCs. A central question is how less developed countries can develop. Our questions for considerations this week as we look at human development are, if you were going to measure development, what three factors, elements, or dimensions would you use? Why does development vary among countries? Why does development vary by gender? And why is energy important for development? At this point, I would like you to pause the video and consider the question, if you were going to measure development, what three factors, elements, or dimensions would you use? The United Nations compares levels of development on an index called the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index considers development to be a function of three factors or dimensions: standard of living, overall health, and access to education. Each country gets a score of these three factors, which are then combined into the overall Human Development Index, or HDI. The UN groups countries into four classes according to HDI: very high, high, medium, and low. Countries with very high HDRs are considered developed. The other three classes are considered developing. This is a map of the Human Development Index for 2011. Where are the developed countries? Where are the low developing countries? If you take away the title, where have you seen maps with similar patterns before? The Human Development Index is a summary of measures of the average achievement in key dimensions of human development. And the key dimensions used to develop the Human Development Index are a long and healthy life, knowledge, and a decent standard of living. The health dimension is assessed by life expectancy at birth, a measure that we've explored earlier in this semester. Remember that this measure is provided on the World Population Data Sheet from the Population Reference Bureau. The education dimension is measured by mean years of schooling for adults aged 25 and over, and expected years of schooling for children of school entering age. So you have two measures. One looks at adults who have most likely completed their education, and then students that are entering school today. The standard of living dimension is measured by gross national income per capita. So we have a life expectancy index, an education index, and a gross national income index. And this is kind of a simplified version of what human development entails. So when we look at life expectancy, United Nations considers good health to be an important measure of development. So the main indicator is the life expectancy at birth. This measure, as we can see on our World Population Data Sheet, the global average is 71 years. For developed countries, the average is 79 years. For developing countries, it's 69 years. People are healthier in developed countries than developing countries. When a person in a developed country gets sick, the country possesses the resources to care for her. Again, refer to your population data sheet for details about the life expectancy at birth in specific regions and countries. This is a map showing life expectancy at birth from the World Population Data Sheet for 2015 for the countries of the world. You see the countries with life expectancies greater than 75 years at birth in the Americas, Europe, and selected countries elsewhere, including China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. The countries with the lowest life expectancies, which are lower than 60 years, can be found in sub-Saharan African countries. So one reason that development varies by country is that expectancies for long and healthy life is lower in certain countries. Next, we'll look at access to schooling. The United Nations considers years of schooling to be the most critical measure of the ability of an individual to gain access to knowledge needed for development. So think about access to knowledge. The assumption is that no matter how poor the school, the longer the pupils attend, the more likely they are to learn something. The average person over 24 years old in a developed country has attended school for almost 12 years. The average person in a developed country who is over age 24 has attended for nearly 7 years. However, the person in a least developed country would have to attended school for only 4 years. Now, schooling is changing and more children have access to school today. So if you look at expected years of schooling, you would expect that to be higher, and it is. So for the world, expected years of schooling is 12.2 compared to 7.9 for those over 24. In barely highly developed countries, it's 13.6. In developing countries, it's 11.7 years of expected schooling, and in least developed nations, it's 9.3. Some of the other considerations for this dimension are the quality of schools. For example, the pupil-teacher ratio in a primary school in a developed country is 14 on average versus 26 for developing countries. Also for consideration is the literacy rate, which is the percentage of the country's population that can read and write. It exceeds 99% in developed countries, as students in developing countries are at a disadvantage also because most of the textbooks are not published in their native language. Improved education is a major goal in many developed countries, but funds are often scarce to help nations achieve these goals. So this is another reason why development varies among countries. This map shows the mean years of schooling for adults 24 and over, and you can see again the pattern showing that the highest average years of education are for those people in developed countries, North America, Europe, Oceania, Japan, South Korea, and a few other countries. The lowest level of education can be found in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This map shows the estimated years of schooling for children entering school year today. So the expected years of schooling are lowest in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. There are countries on all continents with 14 years or more of expected schooling, but all countries in North America, Europe, and Oceania are included in that figure. The UN considers the standard of living based on two functions: the gross national income, which is the value of the output of goods and services produced in a country annually, including money that leaves and enters the country. The gross domestic product is similar, except it doesn't account for money entering and leaving the country. Therefore, we're using the gross national income. Per capita GNI measures the average mean wealth for the country, not its distribution among citizens. And it includes a purchasing power parity index, which means what is the purchasing power how does the purchasing power vary among countries, and that factor is built into this index. So for the world, we have average gross national income with purchasing power parity of 14,301. very highly developed countries, that figure is 41,594. In developing countries, it's 9,071, and least developed countries, 2,387. This measure that helps you consider what monies are available to help countries develop. So this map shows the gross national income in 2011 adjusted for purchasing power parity. The GNI per capita, PPP, is highest in developing countries: Northern America, Europe, Oceania, Japan, and South Korea. The lowest figures, again, are in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. This unique infographic interprets the Human Development Index through a tree. The standard of living measure is represented by the width of the tree trunk. The number of leaves represents the education index, so more leaves equals a higher education index. And the color of leaves represents the health index. Taller trees have a higher overall HDI. So this graphic shows that in 2014, the tallest, widest, greenest trees, or those with the highest level of human development, are in Europe and Latin America. The smallest, yellowest, and least robust are in Sub-Saharan Africa. This graphic excludes Northern America for some reason. But I wanted to give you an idea of the different ways in which quantitative information can be displayed through graphics. North America is shown on this more traditional graph, which shows the developed regions in red and the developing regions in green. The graphic depicts the South Pacific, which would include New Zealand and Australia, as the most developed, and Sub-Saharan Africa as the least developed. North America as a region ranks as the second highest developed region, according to the Human Development Index. A country's overall level of development can mask inequalities in the status of men and women. At best, women have achieved near equality with men in some countries, but not in others. In other countries, the level of development for women lags behind the level for men. The United Nations created the Gender Inequality Index to measure the extent of each country's gender inequality. The Gender Inequality Index measures empowerment, labor, reproductive health. The higher the Gender Inequality Index, the greater the inequality between men and women. This map shows that the Gender Inequality Index is higher in developing countries than developed ones. The lowest Gender Inequality Index numbers, and therefore the least inequitable, are in Europe, and the highest numbers are in Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, developed countries use large quantities of energy to produce food, run factories, keep homes comfortable, and transport goods and people. Historically, in developing countries, people relied primarily on power supplied by themselves or by animals, known as animate power. Supplementing animal power was energy flowing from water and burning biomass fuel, which is fuel derived from plant material and animal waste, so like cutting down trees or using animal dung for waste and for fuel consumption. During the Industrial Revolution, developed countries converted to inanimate power generated by machines. This map shows energy demand per capita. The highest per capita consumption or per person usage is in North America, and the lowest in Sub-Saharan Africa. Please continue to read about energy, gender equality or inequality, and other development indexes in your textbook. In summary, the Human Development Index measures the level of development of each country. is calculated by combining three measures: standard of living, and healthy life, and access to knowledge. The United Nations has not found a single country in the world where the women are treated as well as the men. Development depends on abundant, low-cost energy. To develop more rapidly, developing countries must adopt policies that successfully promote development and find the funds to pay for it. As you continue to explore development, consider: why do countries face challenges to development? How did your measures of development compare with the measures developed by the United Nations? And did your measure include happiness? Some things for consideration as we explore development and consider diversity and distinction among nations in the world. Have a great week.